Okay, right. So what I want to do now, can somebody tell me what's the difference between an open and a closed question?
An open question is a question in which somebody expresses himself freely.
Yes.
The other one is a question.
Lovely, perfect description. So can you now go back through all of your questions and indicate which ones, just tick them, which ones are open, which ones are closed, okay?
Why, how,
There's some colour and all done? Yeah. So just want to go around each group, total number of questions and the number of them that were open. Okay? So how many questions do you have altogether and how many were open?
12.
More than 12.
Yeah, okay.
At least 12.
At least 12 questions.
Two of them.
And only 2 were closed. Okay. Okay, you guys
We have 14 questions and 4 of them are closed.
Right, okay, that's great. You better have a seat there. You guys?
Are you prepared? Just 10 minutes. All of them are open.
Only 2 are open. Okay.
15 düzelteyim mi? Not 14.
Yeah, we have 15
Yasal değil.
Okay, anybody else?
Excuse me, we wrote not 14 but 15. Sorry, 15. The second one. The second one. Yes.
That was the first one. No, that's actually up there. 14, 15, okay. Okay, folks. Right, that's just a little bit of fun to get us all warmed up. We're going to be thinking about questions all the way through this week, so I thought it'd be quite a nice activity to start thinking about how we ask questions and the types of questions we ask. And it's important the sort of questions that we ask our students, whether it's formative in class, whether it's exam questions, and also the questions we ask of ourselves when we're reflecting on what we do. So questions are kind of very integral to this part of the course, so that's why I chose that activity as an icebreaker. But as academics and scientists, I think questioning what happened, what you're seeing, is absolutely critical. And I think what's really interesting here, of all the questions that you've generated, the majority are open questions. If you really want to find out something, you have to ask open questions. Most of you have only got a few closed questions because those kind of yes/no answers are not very informative. So when you're asking questions of yourself, when you're asking questions of your colleagues when we move to the next activity in terms of reflection, it's really important that we keep those questions open. So just bear that in mind. I'm just including this because it just kind of reinforces that idea that when we're thinking like scientists, like academics, we have to question everything. What is the evidence for what we're seeing? And the history of science is a history of error. Finding those errors is based on by questioning them. So we have an example here where errors, in what we're doing is systematically criticised. Okay, so we don't know that there's an error there until we criticise it. So an example of that is Galileo, who kind of critiqued what Aristotle said about falling bodies, which kind of relates back to our falling law. For hundreds of years, everybody assumed that heavier objects fell more quickly than light objects. Aristotle, and then Galileo challenged that because he actually said, well, what's the evidence for this? And apocryphally he threw things off of the leading clarities, but I'm not sure that bit's true. But anyway, the important part is that the questions are at the centre of everything we do as academics. We have to keep questioning the facts, questioning the evidence, and so science progresses and so we move on. Okay, so that's just a little bit of an aside. So thinking about questions. Questions can wake us up, so hopefully that activity woke you up this morning. And they can prompt new ideas, they can show new thoughts, new directions, new places to go, but only if they're the right sort of questions. If they're closed questions, they have the opposite of all of these things because it channels people down to a certain route. Okay? And, it can make, and certain types of questions can make people very defensive. So there's this idea of pushing and pulling questions. Okay? You know, the sort of push questions are, you know, telling, instructing, very directive sort of questions. Why have you not done your homework? You know, what are you doing about this? There's very, why don't you try this? What, you know, very sort of directive, very kind of pushing people along in a certain direction. And when we go into our reflective kind of mode, we need to be thinking much more about the pulling questions. How can you find people find their own solutions to problems? Okay. So how can you, by asking them questions, how do you open up their ideas? Because I'm sure this is a concept that's very familiar to all of you, is that in your own practice, if you feel like you've come up with the idea yourself, you're much more likely to engage in it than if someone has told you what to do. So if you ask questions that allow people to identify a direction for themselves, they are more likely to go along that track than if you're saying, right, what you need to do is change your assessment, change this, change your teaching style. People are going to go, no, right, immediately feel very defensive. Whereas if you come up with the ideas yourself, then you're in that kind of pull direction. So reflecting, paraphrasing, all those types of things, okay? So here's just some examples, you know, that you might think of post your peer observation. So very close questions. Did you like being observed? Yes or no? Did you learn anything from observing somebody else? Are you going to do anything differently in your teaching? Very kind of aggressive, directive, you know, you must be doing something wrong. Whereas the open questions, how did you feel about that? It just gives people the opportunity to explore, you know, the opportunities or what they felt. What did you think you learned from observing somebody else? And how did that change the way you teach? How did that change the way you feel about it? So you can see questions in very similar areas, but can generate quite different emotions, I think, within us. Yes? Would you kind of agree with that? That those more open questions you feel more immediately more ready to be engaged with them. One question, which can be an open question, but it can be quite an aggressive question, is why. Okay? And when I first thought about this, or was thinking about why we avoid the question why, I kind of just think about when I use it, and it's usually with my kids. Why am I the only person who does the washing up in this house? Why do I always pick the rubbish off the floor? It's quite an aggressive question, isn't it? And it makes the person on the receiving end very defensive. So why is quite an aggressive question. Why did you do this? Why did you not do that? So I would try to avoid that question why when we're thinking about questioning each other's practice. So if you think about when you're looking at the peer observation type activity, why did you start with this? You know, it's still quite aggressive rather than giving the person an opportunity to explore it. And you might actually not even be thinking about this in a kind of critical way, but if you're on the receiving end of that why question, you kind of feel like you have to justify yourself. Yeah? Where, you know, and actually even as a questioner, you're not really using it in an interrogative way, but on the receiving end you can still feel like I've got to defend myself. So you can just think of different ways of phrasing that question to make the person feel more comfortable. So you just see some other examples there. Okay, so what we're warming up to here, did anybody form an action learning set over the last period? Whenever you get together in a group? Did you kind of nominally have a group that you didn't actually meet? Do you know who should be in your group? Yes. You met. Okay. I'm not going to hold your feet to the fire here and ask how many people did their peer observation session with Mr. Malik here, kind of ticking the boxes. But does everybody know which action learning set they're part of? Yes. You don't know. Okay.
Because I don't have any action learning program. I set I'm from engineering topic, from major, and we were on 2 persons.
Oh, okay. Right. So what we'll do today, if you're already part of a group, form that group, and we can add in a couple more people to that group. Otherwise, we're going to work in. You can form new groups. Okay. It can be quite useful if your group is in a similar discipline area, but it's not critical. Okay. Because you can learn stuff from other people. It's useful if the group are based or do mainly their teaching on the same campus, because then it's going to make it easier for you to observe each other. Okay. So. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to form those groups, and we're going to spend a little bit of time working in those groups. Feel free to move out of this room and in your groups and sit somewhere else, but you'll need to move the chairs around anyway so that you have an opportunity. So action learning, we touched on this at the end of the first module a couple of months ago. It's a process really of staff development, professional development, used quite a lot in business and industry, where you're trying to kind of develop change through learning. Okay, and the basic idea is that each member of the set or the group is given an opportunity to talk about whatever issues they're facing, within the workplace. It could be, obviously in our situation, it's going to be issues around learning and teaching, or even completing your portfolio, your apprenticeship application. It can be anything to do with that, but it's also used, in many different sectors in terms of, people use it in terms of team management, in terms of leadership. But the model is that each member is given a set amount of time to present and talk about an issue that they're facing. Okay, so that is when you're the focus of the group's attention, you have the stage. Okay, and that's one of the most important characteristics of this action learning, is that you are given a set amount of time where everybody focuses on your issue, your challenge, the problem that you want to discuss. Okay. So they present the problem, and everybody else in the group listens to what they have to say, and you then only ask open questions. Okay. So the idea is that you just try to help the person elucidate the problem in more detail by asking opening questions. Okay. If we go back to this slide here, we should be very much up here, because what we want to do is help a person solve their own problem. Don't kind of fire in with solutions. I've worked in many action learning sets, and the biggest fault is everybody jumps in with, oh, this is what you need to be doing, this will solve that problem, and telling people 3 or 4 different ways to solve the problem. That is not an action learning set. An action learning set is asking questions so that the person can identify a course of action that's going to work for them. Undoubtedly, they've been thinking about this problem for a while. They'll have thought of many of the solutions that you've come up with in 30 seconds. Okay, so the idea is that you help them identify the best course of action. Okay, so at the end of their time slot, they need to identify something they're going to do. So we think about the action part of the learning. So they need to identify an action that they're going to do at the end of that period. Okay, so they're learning through reflecting and speaking about the problem, and then they're identifying an action. Okay, so within your groups, this works best if there's a moderator and a timekeeper. Okay, so we're going to agree about a time for each person to talk. and then also agree within a set that there's a moderator. So the moderator is there to really focus on these questions here, that the questions are not becoming too closed, that you're not providing solutions, okay? So the moderator should sit there and go, no, sorry, you're offering them a solution, we'll ignore that and go back to asking those questions, yeah? So identify somebody who in your group you feel strong enough to tell everybody else if they're doing it wrong. I'm sure you're all capable of that, having got to know you all very well. All of you are capable of moderating, and then a timekeeper, just so that we have time for everybody to get an equal opportunity. If you let somebody have too long, then it means the time for the other people is squeezed. Okay? Right, well, while we think about the time for each of the people, can you give me an idea of how many people are in each group? Do you want to just, I'll give you a few minutes to form your groups, and then we'll work out how many people are in each group. Okay? Yes? So,
We're 5.
you're 5, okay, you're all happy. You guys...